ahead and get started. And my name is Stacy Stanley. I am coming to you from Eden Prairie, Minnesota. I am the associate superintendent in Eden Prairie Schools, and I am really excited to spend some time with all of you. Deb Henton asked me to facilitate a session, and I always say when Deb comes knocking, you really need to step up to the plate. And so I'm really glad to be with you to talk about leveraging your facilitation skills to manage complex change. And I am confident that every last one of us on this call is navigating complex change right now. We are going to have some time together where we'll do an open mic, we'll go into breakout sessions. um, we will actually do like some reflection, some journaling. So you want to make sure that you have a pen, a piece of paper next to you, and we are going to go ahead and get started because 90 minutes is a short period of time for this. This is something that um, our superintendent, my superintendent, Dr. Josh Swanson, and I have been working on actually with all of our team for the past several years. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in just a second. And Dave Christians, I have to really thank him for this because he is going to help me behind the scenes to make sure that we get the breakout room set up and stuff like that. All right, so if somebody can show me a thumbs up if you see the screen there. Awesome. And then I'm going to go ahead and go into present mode. And for those of you who have not presented in Zoom, I kind of lose all sight of you. So just know that when I go into present mode, I'm not going to be able to see a lot of your faces or things like that, but we will have a time to connect. All right, so again, I know a few more people came on. So again, my name is Stacy Stanley. I am coming to you from Eden Prairie, where I serve as the associate superintendent. And again, just really excited that Deb asked me to come and spend some time with you today. So our outcomes for the day, we're going to have an opportunity to center as leaders. I know that many of you have your elementary kids coming back in, or maybe you're starting to bring your secondaries back into a hybrid model. And so we're going to take some time to really center as leaders. We're going to explore stances for successful facilitation. We'll garner a deeper understanding of brain research, which is really important as we're trying to lead during these complex times. And then you'll be able to depart with some nuts and bolts for just having strong meetings. So we'll go ahead and get started. What I will say is we have a double track agenda today. So on one hand, we're really going to be learning about processes and you'll have some takeaways. And on the other hand, I am also modeling for you some of the facilitation strategies that I have found to be really helpful for me as I was working as a principal. I also worked as a director of curriculum assessment instruction, student support services. And then of course, during these past 11 months now, 10 months now, as an associate superintendent and helping to co-lead the district for working through the pandemic. Our work today is going to serve as a both and. We are going to look at leadership for transformation and some transactional pieces of leadership because they both work in tandem together. We hear about and we read about transformational leadership, and we know that we don't always sit in that space. It's really hard to sit in that space 100% of the time. Our work will be about leading for adaptive perceptions and then also leading through the technical lens. And that's the nuts and bolts that you're going to get. So we're going to start off with an opportunity for us to just ground ourselves. Again, we each have so much going on in our work that it just doesn't allow for time for us to really reflect. I know, like I said, several of you are, regardless of your role, are working to bring elementary students back in. Your kids may have not been in for almost 365 days. Your kids may have been in and then they had to go out. Now they're coming back in. And so we really want to take time to really ground ourselves, to really put on the table what is it that's circling in our head that we just need to take some time for the next several minutes to set aside and give ourselves permission to set aside. Um, and then when once you put that on the table with the individuals that you're working with, then you just declare you're in. And when you say I'm in, that just means that I am in for this time together, um, to learn, and I'm going to set that information aside. So I'm going to model for you a little bit right now. So um, we are in the process of designing pathways, and we made the announcement yesterday after an 11-month study that we are going to change our start and end times. Our superintendent announced it at school board last night, and so, that's weighing heavily on my mind because I'm wondering about our stakeholders, I'm wondering about our teachers, and I had to make the decision for spending the time with you folks today that I was going to just set that aside and I would think about everything that is related to that. And then I'm in. So you will do the same thing when you go into breakout rooms. You're going to have a chance to talk about that heavy thing that's laying on your mind. And then once you get done, you'll be able to say, I'm in. And then we'll come back together. And Dave is going to send us into breakout rooms. You're going to be in short breakout rooms or small breakout rooms with no more than 2 or 3 people, no more than 3 people. And you only want to take a couple of minutes so that we can make it through that 6 minutes in a pretty efficient way. So I will see you when you come back, on the other side. Have fun and enjoy your time of grounding. Welcome back, everyone. I say that going into the breakout rooms is kind of like Star Trek. And some people get beamed in right away, and some people it takes them a while to come back. So we'll just take another couple of seconds here to make sure that we have everybody back. And while we're making sure that we have everybody back, I will say that strategy is called an inclusion activity. And that inclusion activity, again, really allows individuals to become present when we have so much going on in our work environment. And we've always, as educators, as leaders, no matter what role we hold in our system, we've always had a lot going on. And certainly during the pandemic, it has been amplified. And so it's okay to give ourselves that time to really ground, to really be prepared to come in and to fully be here. And there are a variety of inclusion activities that you can use. There's fun inclusion activities, right? And so that you can do to just bring people in. I've used some, coming in over the summer, who's been biking, who's been walking, who's been running, who's been rocking in a chair. There's a difference between an inclusion activity and an icebreaker. So an inclusion activity is designed to make sure that we bring the voice of everyone into the room somehow. And obviously we wouldn't be able to do that here today and bring everybody into the room, but you were able to bring your voices into that small breakout room. So again, that inclusion strategy is called I'm in. All right, so, let's see here. All right, so I wanted to let you know the resources that are my go-to resources. And I don't know how many of you have read, I'm sure some of you have come across Larry Dressler's Standing in the Fire book. I absolutely love this book. I've probably read it 5 different times. The subtitle is Leading High Heat Meetings with Clarity, Calm, and Courage. And that is the tip of the iceberg. It's really about leadership in incredibly chaotic and complex times. And I cannot think of a time that would be more descriptive than the time that we are in right now. The other resource that I use is from the Adaptive Schools. I'm not sure really how many folks have gone through Adaptive Schools training. Adaptive schools, again, is a training that looks at culture and climate and building a system that creates the space for people to be open, for people to be welcome, and for people to be reflective more than anything. Um, I went through adaptive schools training with Carolyn McAnders, and she said something that was incredibly powerful in one of the trainings. She said she could walk into a school, she could watch a principal facilitate a staff meeting or a professional development, and she would be able to tell immediately how the teachers provided instruction in their classrooms. And that blew me away. At that time, I was director, and I remember thinking to myself, well, if that's the case for principals working with teachers and modeling, that it must be the case for me at that time as a director and now as an associate superintendent when I'm working with directors and principals. And so I really stand by the adaptive schools model, and they offer a lot of facilitation moves. You're going to get a link to the different facilitation moves that they offer. And then for the nuts and bolts, I love this book where the action is, it really gets you down to the nitty gritty and how to create effective meetings and how to really listen to the staff that you're leading to find out if your meetings are effective. Oftentimes we hold a meeting. We don't really think about gaining feedback from a meeting per se. And we don't know if we're being effective. And so those are the resources that I would recommend. So we are going to take a poll really quickly here. And what I'm really looking at is the frequency with which you feel like you're standing in the fire, where you're experiencing high heat meetings. Let's look back over, we don't even have to do the past year. You can look back over the past 6 months. To respond to this question here, it seems like I am standing in the fire, experiencing high heat meetings, whether it's a group meeting or it's a one-to-one meeting, it doesn't matter. You'd select 1 for every once in a while, 2 for frequently, or 3 for daily. So the poll should come up for you, and then you can actually choose which one every once in a while, frequently, or daily, and then we're actually going to be able to see the results of the group. Oh, there we go. All right. So we have some dailies. About 64%, or exactly 64% of those who responded said frequently or daily, which is not a surprise right now. And every once in a while, that's a good thing. That is a good thing, because that means that some change is being managed. I know I was on with one of my principals just before I came on this call. I had a one-to-one, and was talking with her about, we in Eden Prairie, we have our kids back in elementary, and to do so, we are actually using the face shields and the face masks. And you might imagine that is stressful for teachers. It causes them to have to project their voice all the more. We found out that we had to get them voice amplifiers, and so it's a little frustrating for them. And I was on the phone with her and talking about that, and she had said, she feels like she's standing in the fire, walking down the hall every 5 minutes, and that makes sense. It's kind of the space that we're in right now. Well, that's good to know. It's good to know where folks are at. It kind of gives me a feel for where we're at as well. So we are going to go into those stances that I talked about. And those stances come from the work of Larry Dressler, again, from his Standing in the Fire text. When you think about a stance, it's a position that you take. And our role as facilitators of meetings, again, whether there are team meetings, whether they're one-on-one meetings, or whether they're an entire group meeting, who we bring into the room really truly makes a difference and helps support the success, or support, a meeting going sideways as well. So we're going to talk about 6 different stances today. And right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to take out a pen and a piece of paper. And during the time as I'm talking, because some of you may absolutely love lecture mode, some of you may absolutely not love lecture mode. And so I'm going to invite you to just draw pictures or to write down words that are resonating with you. And we're going to have a time where we'll be able to process this together as a group after I'm finished. So the first stance is standing with awareness. And so as a facilitator, what's most important is really being aware of yourself and what you're bringing to the table, being aware of um, where you are with your mind, where you are with your presence, being aware of whether or not you, if your heart is there, whether or not you want to be there, what are you feeling, your facial expressions, your body language, really that deep self-awareness, what we call going to the balcony and being able to see yourself as if you were looking down on yourself from the balcony to see what your presence is, what vibes are you bringing into the room, um, because everybody can read that, whether it's a virtual room or whether it is in a true room, a brick and mortar room. We know that they can read that, and so that is so important. And it's okay to take that time as you're going through and stop and reflect, what am I bringing into this meeting that could possibly be causing the reactions of the individuals that I'm in the meeting with. The next stance is standing in the here and now. And very often when things are intense, it is really easy to think, okay, I just have to go through this meeting and I just have to get through this meeting right now. 10 minutes from now, they'll have the information and we will be able to work through that. But what Dressler offers is that it's more important to be prepared to stay present, to stay mindful, because when we're present and we're mindful, we are really able to listen to authentically, listen to what the individuals in the room are saying to us to make sure that we can help them to transition through this change. So you may be familiar with some of the work of William Bridges and his work around change. And if not, that's okay. What William Bridges says is there's change, a static event. For instance, we're changing our school start and end times next year. And then there's transition. That the transition is really more about guiding individuals through the psychological aspect of something that is going to be happening that's different. Oftentimes, we want to manage that event, whatever it is that's happening. And once we get to that, and maybe the next day we think it's done. And they say that it can take individuals years to really transition into what that change is. And you may have come across people in your career where, you're thinking, wait a minute, we added, I don't know, a math curriculum, or we moved to having professional learning communities a decade ago. And so why are we talking about this right now? And truthfully, that individual that you're speaking to, they never transitioned into owning that we had moved into the use of the professional learning communities model, to build cultural capacity and to serve our students in our schools. So um, change change is an external, it's situational, it's an event. Transition, it's more about that individual, it's internal, it's psychological, and it is a process and it does take time. And so the same with standing in the here and now. It's important for us to be present so that we can start to really understand where an individual is coming from. And the only way that we do that is through really listening with empathy, and um, that listening does not happen unless we're present, unless we are willing to be there and stand in the here and now. Standing with an open mind, you know, rarely, if we were to define crisis and really monitoring and guiding a team or an individual through crisis, would we think about curiosity? because too often for those of us who, and all of us are leading through, crisis of the pandemic right now, but whether it is we had a fire at our school, or there's a crisis with a family, or there's a crisis with a student, or crisis within the district, oftentimes we immediately move into that take charge mode. And that's okay, because we need to do that. When we're standing in the fire in a situation around change, um, what Dressler says is we really need to stand with an open mind. We need to remain curious. We need to ask the questions. We need to ask questions so that we garner a deeper understanding for what is happening at that time. Um, we all bring to the table our mental models, and we can receive information and we can go up that ladder of inference really quickly, so that we are on the top rung, um, thinking that what an individual was talking about, or the comment that they put out into the room, was one thing, and it may be something entirely different. And especially during times of crisis, or during times where complexities exist. And so really being curious, really asking those questions, um, being willing to give that time to really hear out what leaders are saying. I was in the last masterclass session, and when we went into breakout rooms, there were a couple of us that were saying, "Wow, we're kind of seeing with some of the principles that we lead, some concerns around stress and mental health." And when we stand with an open mind and we're really listening to the leaders that we're guiding through all of this complex change, we get better ideas. It allows us to lean into our creativity and to be innovative as well. Knowing what you stand for. So when we're leading in a pressure cooker, oh, you know what? The numbers are increasing in the county. And for that reason, we're going to have to think about going to distance learning. So then we say that we are going to be thinking about going to distance learning. We're exploring this. And then we hear from stakeholders who say there's absolutely no way that we need to go to distance learning. You need to stay in. It doesn't matter how high the numbers are. We know that we have so many competing stakeholders right now in determining how we're going to serve our kids. And when we're in the pressure cooker, it is really difficult to really stand in place and stay firm with your beliefs and values. And I cannot, I'm going to read something to you from the Dressler text here, because I know that I could not say it any better than him. But what he says is, as we face what feels like overpowering pressure to comply with a group's wishes, we need to know who we are at our core. As we feel ourselves succumbing to the pull of ego and pride, we need a higher, authentic self that serves as a solid anchor point from which we make good choices. We need to know what we stand for, because it enables us to choose to lead with consistency, integrity, and resolve in the face of pressures, and it prevents us from acting from a self-defensive place. So I can imagine all of you during the pandemic have had that space where you were in that pressure cooker, and ultimately you're just trying to do right for kids. You're trying to do what's right for kids. You're trying to do what's right for your staff, and knowing what you stand for really centers you, and it really helps to guide you in having those conversations, whether it is parents or it's some of you actually have school boards that you work with, whether it is students, because we hear from our high school students all the time here in Eden Prairie, whether it is other community members, whether it is business owners. We know that we play a significant role in our community in education, and really understanding the very essence of what you believe will really help you to go through those pressure cooker situations. Dance with surprises. Now, I got to tell you, when I was reading the book and I came to this chapter, I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be a little bit too fluffy for me. This idea of dancing with surprises, as I read through several years ago, and I was a director of curriculum assessment and instruction, and it was about the time that we were going to implement a new curriculum. And um, I learned through reading this and applying the information that it was most beneficial to me, because I learned that dancing with surprises is about being flexible, about being malleable, about being fluid. You know, we've definitely had to learn a few different two steps over the course of the past 11 months, and new dances that, quite honestly, are going to make us better as a system. And they're going to allow us to navigate and to eliminate, hopefully, some of the inequities that were existing in our system. And so, that dancing with surprises is, not necessarily letting it roll off of our backs, because we have to be cognizant and we have to be aware. And at the same time, it's about going with the flow, learning, which allows us to be creative and innovative as well. And then finally, the last stance is to stand with compassion. So the meaning of compassion is to suffer together, not to necessarily have pity for. It is a sympathy, and it is about having empathy. And so in those moments that individuals are frustrated, that we're working with, that they may be saying things that are not necessarily true. They may be, putting frustrations out there that we don't see as professional. When we're standing with compassion, we're really seeking to understand the place that they're coming from. Doesn't mean that we, don't necessarily need to pull them aside later on or something like that. But when we try to stand in their shoes, to really understand what all of this movement means back and forth for a person who's in middle management, for a person who is a parent, and they are as worried about their own children as they are about the children in the schools that they lead in. When we really start to think about it that way, we can begin to understand their emotions. It allows us to center ourselves. It allows us to dig more deeply into that self-awareness. And it allows us to help, again, them transition through the change processes that we're going through. Because remember, change is an event, it's situational, but it's the transition with the change that really makes a difference and causes some of the discombobulation in our systems. Now, these stances don't work separately. It's not like, when I'm facilitating, I'm thinking about just self-awareness. They are interwoven. They work in tandem with one another. You're oftentimes having to dance with surprises while at the same time having to keep and stand with an open mind. So I am actually going to stop sharing for just a second, because I said I was going to invite you to write some things down as I was going through those different stances. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to invite you to raise your hand. For those of you who may not know how to raise a hand in Zoom, because there still are folks who don't know how to do that. What you would do is you can click on where it says participants down at the bottom, and then a few, you'll see if you scroll all the way down, it should allow it, you should see a hand that you can raise there. And so I'm going to invite you to raise your hand, and we'll take a few folks, and we'll just listen to what are you thinking about with this idea of these 6 stances? When have you used them yourself? What's making sense for you and what's not making sense for you? What resonates with you?
I'll speak up.
Okay.
um, I'll just say that one of the things that I'm a brand new superintendent, and I've thought a lot about just the idea how difficult it is with COVID and all these different decisions and all these different competing interests and what people want, what they don't want, and I think a lot about what the state of Minnesota is going through and the governor's going through and the decisions he has to make. And I've thought a lot about that. And just number three or number four, know what you stand for. I resonates with me because I think if you don't know what you stand for and have a belief system, you'll waffle. And when you waffle, you'll you'll struggle to make anybody happy because you'll be going back and forth. And so I think the only thing you can do is stick to your ground and do what you believe in and kind of hope the rest come. And I see that happening at the state level all the time. Um, and I see it happening in my district as well. So that resonated with me.
Yeah. And is it Donita or Donita?
Danita, like Anita with a D. That's what I
Okay.
always say. It's Anita with a D.
Great. Thanks a lot, Danita.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing that. The one thing is, certainly we know that our stakeholders are, hopefully they'll give us a little bit of grace every once in a while. And at the same time, we know that it builds trust. You had mentioned that word waffling. And when we don't understand where what's most important to us and really knowing what's at the core, if we waffle too many times, that really impacts trust that the community has with us as
Yeah.
well. So, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot for
And
sharing.
just staying consistent and yep, consistency builds that trust. Yep,
Mhm.
I agree.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for sharing. Jody.
Yes, Jody. Well, I was going to share that number 5 resonated with me, and especially in light of how you shared it. One saying that you thought initially it might be a little fluffy for you, and then as you dug into it and understood it more, it connected to how challenging and flexible we need to be right now. The other thing that resonated with me with it is the way it's written, right? The kind of dance with surprises. I think it adds an element of lightness that
Mhm.
um, all that we do every single day is so serious and important. And when we engage in that, I think it is important to bring some humanity and lightness and just some laughter and joy to the moments that we're living in under fire right now. So that's
Mhm.
why that resonated with me.
That's great, Jody. Thanks a lot. I know, because that's just it. As leaders in whatever role we are in the system, it's heavy, right? And we have to take that time to really take care of ourselves and to think of things in a more light way in the midst of having to lead for children and families during a pandemic. So thanks a lot for sharing. And Brooke.
I think the one that resonated most with me was the standing with self awareness. I recognized yesterday I was just having a really bad day, lack of sleep, a lot of decision fatigue. And I could see it like in responses I was making to people. And finally, it was just like, I need to stop responding to this issue right now because I can't do so in a um, way that's going to help the situation. So I'm going to step away for now. So just being aware of that, like you said, and what you're bringing to the meeting.
Mhm, mhm, and that's okay. That, when we're reflective like that, and I have even put it out with um, my principals. It's we're in a tough situation here, and I think we all just need to step back, take a deep breath, and come back in. Take a break for 5 minutes and come back in. And those that we lead, they appreciate that. They really do. They honor that. And again, that builds that trust. And it allows for us to be, like Danita said, offer that consistency. Thanks a lot for sharing, Brooke. And then we'll take two more, Gwen and then Jamie.
Yeah, hi. The one that really resonated with me, along with the know what you stand for, is kind of a simultaneous stand with compassion. And again, it's understanding that we are all in situations, whether you're students, staff, parents, superintendents, that none of us have been in this situation before. And so when there is a lot of emotion or disagreement, I find that I just have to understand
Mhm.
that those people or that person is speaking from their heart based on the information they have or their situation.
Mhm.
And so that balance of standing with what I stand for, or what I think is, what we have to be aware of and consider as we move forward, at the same time, really cannot just shoot people down because, again, everyone's trying to do their best they can in the situation we're in.
Mhm. For sure, Gwen, that idea of suffering together, like we are in this together. I mean, when you look up, I looked up that definition many years ago, and that just brings it to a different place for me as a leader. Families are and teachers are crying. We went through that last spring, and I know all of you did, and we're going through it right now. When they're crying, it's really seeking to understand where they are, and trying to find that flexibility, when we can, so that we aren't just gonna just go ahead and keep on trucking through. Um, but when people know that we care and we're listening to them, and we have to make some
Right,
tough decisions,
right.
you
And I'm
know,
finding that we need to be giving people hope. Even though I don't know the answer, I don't know how this is going to end and when it's going to end, I have to remind people it will, and we need to be ready, and we will be ready. And
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
because I know, some people are just drowning right now with stress and
Mhm.
anxiety.
Mhm. That's great. Thanks a lot. I mean,
Yep.
really strong synthesis of those stances. Thank you. And then last but not least, Jamie.
Sure. I actually was going to build off what you were just saying, Stacy, about compassion and that definition. So, as a team, we've been participating in MDE's SEL grant with the communities that practice, and we're reading Elena Aguilar's book called Onward: Cultivating Emotional Resistance in Educators. And we actually had just read a chapter about compassion. And your definition was super similar to hers, and it just really spoke to me. So I just wanted to read it super quick. When you feel compassion, you are moved to take action to relieve someone else's suffering. You may have experienced the suffering through your empathy. Action is what distinguishes compassion from empathy. And it just really helped me reframe. I think I've always viewed myself as a compassionate person, but putting action in that definition just as a really interesting, different way of thinking about it.
Mhm. That that's really powerful, and it speaks to the authenticity that we need with compassion, right? So it isn't just saying, I really understand, I understand how you're feeling. This is really difficult. You have kids at home and you're trying to teach the kids. It's really moving beyond that and offering the opportunity for them to move forward with finding some solutions for themselves. That's great. I can you do me a favor? Can you put the name of that book in the chat? I have not read that. I would love to read that.
I will. It's a great book study if you're interested in doing it with staff. It actually comes, I have it with me in the office here, a workbook with a bunch of different activities too. So I'll put it in the chat here for everyone.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. Solid dialogue. Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep us moving forward, and I'm going to go back to sharing here. And so I talked a lot about this idea of us as facilitators and one of the things that we have to do as facilitators is to really understand who we're working with and who we're working with, regardless of their title, regardless of how many letters they have behind their name or in front of their name. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and we all have our breaking point. And um, there's so much that we can bear, and we have to understand that, again, whether it's middle management, whether it's district office staff, whether it's paraprofessional, whether it's teacher, paraprofessional, we have to understand about them. So I really like to share some information around the brain and how it's impacted when it comes across things like fear and anger. And so we're going to go through that, have some time to reflect on that afterwards. So this is just a picture of the brain, just as a reminder, different parts of the brain impact and help to guide us in our thinking, everything, right? So just want to get that in front of you, and then we'll have another opportunity to come back and to look at this in a little bit. Now, here's a different way of looking at the brain. So we always talk about the frontal lobe. I know when my kids were teenagers, I just kept on saying, man, I can't wait until that frontal lobe is well developed, right? Because we know that the frontal lobe has so much to do with decision making, right? With our ability to navigate different situations, to plan out, to be thoughtful. And if we've had to do anything during this pandemic, is to try to be thoughtful, to try to plan for what might come, and to remain in the moment when it does come. Of course, we know that emotional center there that monitors our heart rate, our breathing, that, helps us know if we are starting to get upset because, our heart starts to race, our voice may raise, things like that. So that's another picture of the brain that I wanted to introduce you to. And now we're going to take a look at how these four emotions actually impact the brain. And I had mentioned adaptive skills training. And when I went through advanced adaptive skills training, they provided us with this information in slides. And so I definitely need to give them credit for that, but we are allowed to use it. So when we look at these we're going to be looking at some actual brain scans, okay? And when we look at them, you're going to see some areas that are highlighted in red, they might have yellow, and then some areas that are purple, and they may have some blue around them. Those red areas, those are the areas of the brain with when that emotion is in place, are in high demand for nutrients, that's where the blood is flowing to at that very moment. And then the purple areas, those are the areas with that emotion that when the blood is flowing to those high demand areas, the other areas, the purple areas, are where the brain is being deprived of nutrients and energy. So just keep that in mind. Just keep in mind, red, high demand, that's where the blood is flowing to. Purple, that is the area that's being deprived at the moment that individuals are experiencing this specific type of emotion. So here's a look at fear, right? So when fear is in place, and think about the many different times that, daily, probably, that individuals are experiencing fear. I just think about our medical providers. Our nurses, I have no idea how they've navigated this environment. Because you see there that when fear is in place, and it makes sense that all of the blood flow, the demand for the brain, the nutrients, they are going into the amygdala, that space within the brain that controls the emotional center. Then you also see that what is being deprived of those nutrients that is needed right there, that's the frontal lobe. That is that executive functioning. And so, you know, when we've been working with individuals and we're like, that, you know, that's irrational. That does not make sense that that individual should put that on the table or think like that. I mean, my gosh, they are on the executive team. They are middle management. They are our best teacher leader. How could they possibly think that way? Well, this is what fear does to us. It causes us to lose that energy, those nutrients that we need in the frontal lobe to work with and have our strong executive functioning. So I have a picture here of, again, that brain, right? And so again, you know, if there's a lack here of, or if the frontal lobe of the brain is being deprived, you know, can we expect that decision making? Can we expect that planning? And so do we have middle management leaders? Do we have executive leaders who are really struggling in this area? You know, what's best to note is to help us to understand that and understand as leaders how we can use our stances then to really help them to come back and away from here. All right. We're going to go to anger. Okay. Again, when we're angry, I mean, think about just the personal anger that could exist right now. We have colleagues, we have friends who have lost family members. We have colleagues and friends who are just incredibly frustrated and angry for being put into this position of having to lead during this time. We may get angry when people aren't following the protocols and mitigation practices that we've put in place to protect them. You know, again, the blood flow is going to go more toward that emotional center of the brain. And what is actually missing? Where is it being deprived? It's that frontal lobe. What's really interesting is here, you know, you've heard of somebody that said, I got so mad that I felt like I couldn't see. Well, that's actually the occipital. And so there really is some truth to that people can get so mad that they feel like they couldn't see. They feel like they were, you know, blinded in a sense. So now we're going to go to sadness, right? Now, man, you know, I am confident that individuals have had hardships in their lives, but, you know, as superintendents, as principals, as directors of curriculum and instruction, as when we are working with our families in the community, you know, our nutrition services department, you know, how last spring they were delivering dozens of meals out into the community. And, you know, there were times where families just broke down and they were just heartbroken. They just had a sense of hopelessness. And that sadness was not just impacting the families, you know, our nutrition services staff, they were holding that as well. And so when you think about the sadness, what is being impacted? Memory. I have spoken with so many friends who are telling me, you know, something's going on with my brain. Stacey, I literally can't remember things. And I stop them and I say, you got to take time to take care of yourself. You're an overload. This is a really hectic time. And I honestly, there's a lot to be sad about. And so you got to take care of yourself. Again, though, you'll see that the energy goes toward the high demand areas and it's depleted from other areas. And then finally, there we go. Finally, happiness. Now look at this. You know, when you see happiness, when people are feeling healthy, when they're feeling good about themselves, the executive functioning is in a good place. Memory, like I said, my friends who are feeling like they're struggling with their memory, when you can bring yourself to that space where you're mindful, where you're feeling, we're not going to feel good about anything, during the pandemic, but when you're feeling settled, when you're feeling like you're taking care of yourself, when those that you lead are feeling like they are able to take care of themselves, to step back and to be mindful, we see just a balance across the brain. That's when we can make those good decisions. That's when we're not feeling like we're losing connections to things that we had done just naturally for the past, however long that we've been leaders. All of those things are really important to really know and understand, because this is what when we're in that meeting, we see the people, but we don't necessarily see the brains. And it is so important for us to be well aware of what is happening so that we can make certain that we are there to support those that we're leading. So I am going to show a little video here. I don't know how many people are familiar with the SCARF model. It was created in 2008 by David Rock. And SCARF, of course, in education, we always need another acronym. But SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And with this model, David Rock said, when we are leading through change, when we are leading individuals in areas that they just could not fathom that they were going through, in order to help to guide them through and to transition, we can take these areas into consideration. And so I'm going to go ahead and play the video, and then on the backside, we'll have an opportunity to talk about it.
One of the most interesting things about teamwork is that it seems like it should be easy, but trust makes working with others more complicated than it looks. Our brains are constantly trying to decide if others are a friend or foe, and the bucket we put someone into determines how open we are to trusting them. The SCARF model is a helpful way to understand how trust is won or lost between humans. SCARF is an acronym. S stands for status, or how we feel in relation to others. When we feel lesser than others, it affects our ability to build trust. It's natural to try to make ourselves look good in relation to others in an effort to prove our value to the group, but this can inadvertently make others feel small. In a team, it's important to make sure that no one person is positioned as more valuable than another. What can you do to make sure everyone feels valued? C stands for certainty. The brain really loves certainty because when things are certain, our brains can relax. Conversely, uncertainty is scary. Think about it. In monster movies, you almost never see the entire monster. They're always lurking in the shadows, keeping your brain on guard and alert. Because the brain doesn't like unknowns, it is constantly trying to predict what will happen next. But without enough information, the brain will fill in the blanks, usually with worst-case scenario possibilities. This leads to people feeling unsettled and vulnerable. You can combat this problem by communicating often. Information leads to certainty, and that builds trust. A stands for autonomy. When we're given autonomy to make decisions, it signals that others believe in our abilities, and that builds trust. But when we're not given a choice, it makes us feel like our opinions are not valued or wanted. Here's a teamwork tip. The next time you're updating a group on next steps, try giving them a choice. Even a tiny choice is rewarding for the brain. For example, if you were trying to determine what time to start the meeting, it would be more effective to say, would you like to start at 8 or 8:15, than simply declaring, the meeting will start at 8. R stands for relatedness. Humans are hardwired to connect with other humans because we know we are stronger together. When we feel like we're accepted for who we are, we feel safe to be ourselves, which is the conduit to thinking, creativity, and collaboration. But when we feel like we're not accepted, our threat response is activated and we keep our talents all locked up. Within any team, creating a feeling of belonging for all is the key to trust. F stands for fairness. The brain has a fundamental need for things to be equitable. When we perceive that something isn't fair, a threat response is triggered and trust is compromised. From now on, put yourself in other people's shoes and consider how fair they might perceive a situation. And if you're not sure, don't be afraid to ask, does this sound fair to you? Trust is crucial for teams and collaboration. With the SCARF model, you have a powerful framework to build trust within your teams. Try it on and see how it works for you. E-Leadership Academy. Online training, real-life results.
So I'm not with E-Leadership Academy. I just really like that video. So I just wanted to say that. So what we're going to do is we are going to take some time now to go into breakout rooms and to really digest this information that we've learned about the brain and how we can utilize that information as we're leading folks through complex change. And then this idea of the SCARF and how might we use that information to guide our staff as we're leading them through complex change. And Dave is going to send us into breakout rooms.
I'm going to express some compassion. I just referred to my group as guys.
It happens, right?
That's okay, Marty.
It happens. That's when you're super comfortable, I suppose. Well, welcome back, everyone. We have just a few more minutes together, but I'd love to hear from, say, 3 or 4 individuals to share about, what you shared about in your group. What were you making sense of with this idea of, how the brain is impacted by different emotions and this SCARF model? And you can use the hand raise feature again. All right, Sarah.
Someone has to be first. So, we wanted to do more research on it, and we're very intrigued by all of it and understanding. And it spoke to me just how he talked about the monster, and you never see the entire monster. And I've really seen that a lot with COVID. Is just people not knowing, not seeing, not knowing what they're in for, that unknown piece, and how much that has impacted people's actions.
Mm-hmm.
We also talked a lot about power and control, particularly as we're dealing with just people coming back, working, that kind of thing. And, I gave the story of mine who really was upset that we were going to be in person, and how dare we, but she was going to this grimiest bar in town playing bingo.
Yeah.
But understanding it's what's going on in her brain, that she's just really struggling with power and control and fear of the monster out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for staff who were struggling with this certainty. I mean, in education, not everything is certain, but we kind of have prior to pandemic, we knew that school was going to start at a certain time. We knew that MEA was going to come, winter break was going to come, spring break was going to come. We knew it was going to end at a certain time. We knew we were going to be in person, right? So there was a lot of certainty there, and it has left us in a space of ambiguity that for people who really need certainty, it is difficult for them, for sure. And the irony of those pieces, I have that too, Sarah, where like, wait a minute, but you're out here. How can you be afraid to come here? And as you were talking, I kind of had an epiphany. Might be that they're safe there, and that space brings them, that sense of certainty where for us, it would be like, well, nah, maybe not necessarily. So thanks a lot for sharing. I appreciate that. Brooke.
We talked a lot about the SCARF model and specifically the autonomy, trying to give people choices and really reflecting in our meetings how often we're giving choices. Are we giving choices and just being reflective on that?
Mm-hmm. And the simplest of choices, I mean, in that example, it's like 8 or 8:15 or yeah, just the simplest choices can make a difference where folks feel like then they have some they have some ownership, they have some command over what their day is looking like. I don't know about you folks, but I am calling my principals in for meetings. I feel so bad. It feels like every other week I'm having to call an unexpected meeting, and that is a big deal for them. Now that they have all of their, I call them babies, whether they're 4 or whether they're 21, I call them babies. And now that they have all of their babies back in, it's a different experience for them, for sure. What else? Anybody else that has anything else? I'm going to show you a tool that I use. You may not want to use it, but I tell you, it has really brought me a lot of luck since, oh my gosh, over the past 12 years that I've been using it. But do any of you know Jim Rusine? He is a cognitive coach trainer. Has anybody met Jim? Okay. So Jim uses something that he calls a window, and he closes a window. And this is another facilitation technique, and especially in the virtual milieu, I found that it really works. And especially when I was leading community meetings about different things. So you have this window, it closes this way, it doesn't close that way. And you just start to close the window, and you tell folks that when your hands meet, then you're going to move on, that the window is closed on whatever you were talking about, and you're going to move on. And what I have found in the past is that giving that space, instead of cutting short and saying, okay, it allows individuals who really have something to say, and they're just going to put it in the room. And oftentimes it is pretty profound stuff too. So I am going to close the window on the brain research and the SCARF model. All right, good deal. So we are going to move into the last part of the information with our time together, and going to go back to sharing. We're going to dig into the nuts and bolts. What are the basics, the nuts and bolts, the logistics of meetings, because we know we can be that transformational leader. We can really understand who we are, what we're bringing into the room, really understand who our participants are, really try to really lead with that compassion. And if the meeting's not structured well, people are still going to be really frustrated. So I'm just going to go over just some key tips, nuts and bolts for meetings. So first of all, working agreements. Now, there's a couple of things here. Working agreements are the basics. We're going to start and end on time. In the virtual environment, cameras on, cameras off, name up, name down, some of those pieces, just really specific working agreements. But then there's also the norms of working with one another. So are we going to raise our hands to talk with one another? Are we okay with just opening up our mics to share with one another? Are we going to state that we're putting an idea on the table? So there's working agreements, but then there's working norms that you have with one another. These are important, again, both in the virtual milieu as well as the face-to-face milieu. So as you begin to transition back into some face-to-face experiences, you're going to want to have all of those in place. Purpose, your agenda, your outcomes. I started off our morning together saying what our outcomes were going to be, so that you had an idea specifically of what it was going to be. You didn't have like necessarily an agenda because we're only together for 90 minutes. However, you did have the description of the session ahead of time. And that really makes a difference as well, so that you can prepare those who you are leading. And then facilitator moves. Now, I will add it back into the chat. I added it in when we were in breakout rooms. I don't know if it's there, but there's a link in there that has a plethora of different inclusion activities, engagement activities, and activities that are designed to organize and integrate information. So when I was walking through and talking about the different stances, I said, you want to grab a sheet of paper, you want to write, you want to draw pictures. That was really helping your brain to organize and integrate the information that you were learning. I intentionally used the video about the scarf model as opposed to just talking about the scarf model, because the images, you know, the way they were doing the writing and everything, that really helped you to organize and integrate information. And so that link is going to get you to a variety of different ways to engage, because, and especially in the virtual environment, we know we've been on virtual meetings where the person talked the entire time and we didn't have a time to connect or anything. And we thought that we wanted to hang up. And then finally, use your stances as an asset, because that's exactly what they are. Really using them, helping them to work with one another in order to make certain that you're able to guide people through this transition of change. I'll say it one last time. Remember that change is an event. It is situational. It occurs quickly, swiftly. We went from in-person learning to distance learning. Boom, we did that. That was the change. The transition is everything that we went through in the time that we were in distance learning last year. And it's psychological, it's experience-based, it's individual, and it takes time. So just remember that. It is exactly 11:30. I cannot believe that I took like 2.5 days and put it in 90 minutes, but I was able to do that. I just want to say thank you very much. There is my Twitter handle, my Instagram handle, if you ever want to go out and see anything, if you're on Twitter or Instagram, and you can always email me with any questions that you might have. But thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to Mia, and I know Deb isn't able to be here, but for inviting me to offer the session.
Thank you, Stacy. You are so awesome, and to have you do this has just been so great. It's been a wonderful morning, and thank you to all of our participants. A nice big group, and so if you have, it's just so that you're aware, Stacy's been very generous and she's allowed us to record her session this morning, and it'll be on MASA's YouTube channel. You can link that right from our website. And Stacy's handouts will also be on the MASA website. So you got the package right there. The only thing you have to do is find Stacy to help you, like we did today. So thanks to everyone, and have a wonderful day, and just take deep breaths when somebody says the words vaccine or saliva test. Just inhale and let it flow out. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
Continue
you.
to stay safe.